If you're a fan of Metal Gear Solid, you're no doubt used to fake leaks. Seriously, these things pop up like zits at a junior prom. Every time there's a new video game conference or showcase or whatever, the reports start piling in of Metal Gear Solid Remake or Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake leaked to be announced right now! And it's pretty annoying. I just started tuning those leaks out after a while because it never comes true. But the latest PlayStation Showcase rumor mill did include leaks of Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake for PlayStation 5, but then it became a reality. Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. Even when this leaked, I was giving more thought to it than I usually did because I ignored all the previous leaks. The reason is because of Konami's shocking announcement of a remake of Silent Hill 2 last year. The main thing that's made MGS Revival leaks so unbelievable before was that Konami bowed out of the AAA console game market years ago, instead using their intellectual properties for Japanese casino games like the one that Metal Gear Solid 3 got, or re-releases like the Castlevania games, and I thought they'd never return to big budget console games. But if they can bring one classic franchise back, it got me thinking. Maybe they will try and bring Metal Gear back. This then got me thinking about what an MGS1 or MGS3 remake would be like and what effect it might have. But of course, before continuing, we need to talk about the trailer for Delta that we got. And there really isn't anything to say because the trailer was completely CG. But I still decided to do this video because I would like to talk about the project in a philosophical sense. Today, I seek to talk about the idea of remaking these games and what questions we need to ask ourselves about it. These are questions that would work for a video whether the game was real or not, which it is now. So there being no gameplay isn't important yet because, like I said, I'm just talking about the project as an idea. And this is all coming from me. Older subscribers will remember that I once considered myself a massive Metal Gear Solid fan, did a whole retrospective on the main series from 2016 to 2019, built a massive collection of MGS games and all that. I even opened my MGS4 video by stating that it was my favorite franchise in gaming. However, I have not considered myself a fan of these games basically at all since 2021 at the latest and 2019 at the earliest, if I'm honest. I could go into the reasons why, but I don't think that's particularly important for today's video. All that matters is that I'm not approaching this from the angle that these games are the pinnacle of gaming like I might have 4 years ago, because frankly I don't think it is. I don't hate the games, it's just that my current thoughts on Metal Gear is complicated and beyond the scope of what I want to talk about today, so let's just get into it. Where do they stand to gain in remaking a game like MGS1 or MGS3? I would just say 1, 2, or 3, but for some reason the leaks only ever include 1 and 3, which I guess are the most beloved entries in the series. So yeah, if you're Konami, what is the advantage of remaking these games? Well, it's the same reason most things get remade. Taking a beloved thing that already exists and doing it again allows you to have a firm base to work from, as a lot of the conceptual heavy lifting has been done already by the team that made the original. In reviving a dormant IP, remakes are the most tried and true approach because of that time saved in pre-production, as you already know the story and characters and locations and you just need to decide on how you're going to do it again for the modern age. It's also tried and true because on the consumer side, nostalgia sells massively. Doing new things is a risk. People might not be interested. However, if you promise people a 4K ray-traced reimagining of Shadow Moses Island or Groznygrad, then that gets people hyped up because of the fond memories they have of traveling through these locations for the first time when these were cutting-edge visuals. Getting to see it again from a new perspective is just something people get excited to see. What I just said sounds cynical, I know, but I'm not really against nostalgia in a bubble. I think revisiting classics with a fresh coat of paint is great. Of course, I tend to not like a lot of remakes out there and tend to prefer the original version, but some do it right. And when at their peak, remakes are a great chance to turn something comparatively dated into a game that stands the test of time, like Metroid or Resident Evil. Although I thought the PS1 RE was great in its own merits, but I don't know if that's a hot take these days. I think the culture of nostalgia and how that affects people's thinking is an issue that I did a whole video on a few months back, but again, I don't dislike nostalgia. If I ever got to see a modernized Sly Cooper trilogy, my hype would be volcanic. It's just fun to get to try a new version of something familiar. But corporations know this about their audience, and thus we get a culture of remakes and remasters and reboots and revivals and all that stuff. Every company with legacy IPs wants to get in on it because it makes money. Beyond the hardcore fan base or even lapsed fans who haven't played in a while, you gotta consider the general audience. You could revive a dormant IP with an HD collection or whatever, which they're also doing with Metal Gear right now, but a lot of people in the general audience aren't that hyped at the idea of playing really old games. This is something we hardcore players can resent all we want, but that doesn't make it any less true. A lot of people will be turned off at the thought of playing Final Fantasy VII or Resident Evil 4 in their original forms because of the things that they do that are different from how games are made and presented today. In the case of some classic games, they might not have accessible versions out there, and thus remakes appeal to people interested in trying it who either can't or won't play the original. Or just people who like playing the latest and greatest games with the biggest and baddest graphics. I can enjoy nostalgia in this vacuum, while also knowing that the reason remakes exist isn't purely because the people signing the checks were just so passionate about seeing classic games brought to a new audience. So that's the basic idea. Remaking MGS3 is the easiest path to reviving Metal Gear because everything related to Metal Gear Solid 3, even down to the artwork, is iconic and would bring in tons of lapsed fans who remember the original and will be down to see a new take or an entirely new audience. But that begs the question, what do they stand to lose in remaking MGS games? Focusing on MGS3 specifically, that game is one of the most unique and weird games of all time. It has this sandbox of mechanics and systems that have kept players entertained for decades. I think the Phantom Pain is the most fun Metal Gear from a mechanical standpoint and is definitely the only game in the series that I think has a consistent amount of stealth action with good controls and level design, while also having a minimal amount of frustrating gimmicky sections. However, its systems were designed with an open world mission-based structure in mind, when MGS3's systems were very different. But taking MGS5 or just having mechanics like that and transferring it into the world of MGS3, I can easily see a lot of weird obscure stuff just being left at the door, such as bizarre gadgets like a gas spray or a wipe that puts guards to sleep. In a remake, could you defeat the end by fast forwarding the clock on your console? That's an iconic detail, so I can imagine that still being in, but what about something like using caught poisonous snakes to kill enemies and having that not contribute to your kill count because you didn't actually kill the enemy, the snake did? Or using a specific frequency on the transceiver to end the alert phase? MGS3 is littered with that kind of stuff. Kojima Productions games are known to be very detail-oriented. Would a new version maintain all those details? I'm not, nor would I ever imagine bizarre glitches being done on purpose in a new game, but even still, a lot of mechanics and Easter eggs exist in these games that might just get left out or overlooked. Especially because nowadays, many remakes aren't a one-to-one translation of the original. There exist several ways to remake a video game, and I promise I'll do a video on that at some point. But looking at Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4, these are remakes that are based on the same ideas as the original and to varying degrees built new games around old ideas. If my comment section is anything to go by, this has a vocal minority very upset. So let's say they remake MGS3 and then a side house full of collectibles and enemies to sneak by is just left out. I think people will feel let down. Then you gotta consider the enormous fan base that surrounds Hideo Kojima. The drama that resulted in his leaving Konami and going solo would have many people trepidatious about new Metal Gear games without him, but then remaking his classic games without him and his team is something I'd imagine would make people even more worried. But on the flip side, a mostly faithful remake of MGS didn't resonate with people the last time they did it. Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes was a remake of MGS that released in the GameCube in 2003. Problem with this game was that it dropped MGS2's mechanics into MGS1's world. While it boosted the quality of the enemy AI, you can't get past the fact that the game is just broken by the new mechanics. Now, I personally think TTS is a better game to play than MGS1, simply because I don't think MGS is a fun game with its top-loaded difficulty balancing and a third act that's almost nothing but backtracking and exposition dumps with minimal stealth in between, and thus putting MGS2 control into that game and minimizing the backtracking makes for a more fun moment-to-moment experience than the original, but there are just some instances where it's broken in ways the original was not. MGS2 was designed with its new abilities in mind, even if that game has a problem with the second half just dropping off a cliff in terms of stealth action and pacing. Twin Snakes is a game where they got the entire cast back to re-record the 1,000-page script, but sticking to the original material so heavily only invited comparison in the minds of the audience. Thus, you have a lot of people who prefer the original cinematography, the original soundtrack, the original voiceover, and the original atmosphere. I myself prefer all those things in the original. If it had been a remake that was open to making more changes to the level design, pacing, and writing, I think you'd have a more robust conversation about which was better. When you just take the original script, with line reads a lot of people don't like as much, with some dated Matrix action scenes thrown in, it just leaves the Twin Snakes as a product of its time that a lot of people don't really bother with nowadays. Especially because it's never been re-released, which is down to Konami, but you can see why people would skip over it when talking about the series and its evolution, as MGS1 was the genre-defining classic game and TTS was not. Once more, I think the MGS2 mechanics are inherently more fun to work with than MGS1's, so I'd rather replay it over the original, but like I said, it shows the issue with a remake that tries to be faithful and new at the same time. When a remake like Metroid Zero Mission or Resident Evil managed to take many similar moments or even exact level designs and fine-tune them to such an extent that people basically consider them replacements for the original, which is something TTS did not do. On the Konami website, it stated that the dev team wants to do a faithful recreation of MGS3, and the screenshot shows several areas from the Virtuous Mission looking exactly how they did on PS2, but with new graphics. Maybe they will be taking all the original areas and making new mechanics to suit them, but it's too early to say. However, I think a faithful remake might run into the Twin Snakes effect. But I also think a remake that just does the modern RE approach is going to leave people really feeling pissed off more than anything else. Although I believe this is the superior approach. I'd love to see a new take on MGS3 with things like characters having proper give and take in the dialogue over barfs of exposition. I'd love to see the side dialogue worked into the gameplay in a more organic and accessible way like MGS5 does instead of pausing the action and get talked at for minutes. Or having cutscenes that go on so long that they have to cut to visual aid to demonstrate ideas. but a lot of people are attached to this style of writing and would expect it to be that way in order to consider it authentic. I could talk about the writing of Metal Gear for a long time, but I'll refrain from offering up any context further than that at this time. But I hope my point's been made somewhat clear. The profit motive of remaking MGS3 is clear. Nostalgic, iconic games bring in tons of money, everyone is happy. But I feel like a remake that is not super faithful will be very divisive, at least. But one that's super faithful with MGS5 mechanics or whatever is probably going to be fun, but not really one for the ages. Especially since we're also getting MGS collections for modern consoles. This is good. It allows them more room to experiment with the remake, as the original will still be there to speak for itself. But if it's one of those faithful, warts and all type remakes while the original is now accessible, I guess that makes you wonder what the point is even more. I think a remake with more to discuss would be better, but I don't really know if it needs to exist. Of course, I don't believe any game has a reason to exist, it's just that if a game is good, then the game is good. And also, fans might be pissed isn't really a good reason to do or not to do something. You can't really make art based on what you think people might be the most happy with. You want to entertain the audience, of course, but you don't want to make creative decisions based on pleasing the internet because you can never make everyone happy. So you're best off just making the best game possible. But through it all, it's totally within the realm of possibility that I'm wrong here. I want to restate that for those in the back. I may be very wrong here. It's not really an own on me if this video does not age well, because I want every game to be good. I want as many games as possible to be good. I'm even happy to admit when I'm wrong. The biggest example of my getting it wrong I can think of would be Resident Evil 4 Remake. I, like many others who heard the early reports of that game's existence, just thought it could never really work. It could never compare. It's RE4. It doesn't need to exist, all that stuff, but the game we got, in my opinion, was stellar. I loved every second of it, thought it was supremely polished, detailed, and a mechanically fine-tuned and in-depth action experience that had a lot of content and was also very replayable. See my various RE4 videos for more information. That precedent shows how impossible projects can result in great work. Metal Gear remakes could be the best of all worlds and bring the series back into the limelight. It's very possible. I just happen to think it's more of an impossible project than even Resident Evil 4, given all these factors like the lack of Kojima Productions, the depth of these games in terms of mechanics, and its massive fan base. A lot of factors are working against a project such as this from the offset. I could be proven wrong, but we'll wait and see. What I think Konami should do with the series that I think pretty much any fan would be down for would be remaking Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. Think about everything I've lined up thus far in this video. Remakes are safer projects because the pre-production doesn't involve conceptualizing something entirely original. This would still stand for a remake of 35-year-old games, however people aren't nearly as attached to those original adventures as they are the Solid series. A lot of fans probably haven't even fucking played them because they're dated 80s exploration-based games. I personally think the first Metal Gear is pretty underrated, but that's neither here nor there. Doing these games would be the better projects in my opinion because the original story is there to expand on. These games have been retconned into oblivion by the Solid series despite being the center point of the saga, so doing them again would be a chance to fix that up and bring these stories up to the standards of the 3D games. Retelling the origin story of Solid Snake, one of gaming's biggest icons. Also just redesigning Outer Heaven and Zanzibar Land into whatever stealth action game you want it to be because nobody would be asking for the top-down 2D games to be remade exactly as they were. Change is what people want to see with those. They have everything to gain from the things mentioned earlier and almost none of the cons. But that's not the game that we have right now. I hope one day they do get around to it, but probably not. Once more, I don't think any project is doomed to fail. Any game could be badass and worth playing, and MGS3 Remake could be just that, and I'd say so if that's what I felt about the game, but I just think it's an idea with a lot working against it from the offset, speaking from the perspective of what a hardcore fan might think having formerly been one and currently being someone who wouldn't mind seeing a lot of things done over. But that's my 2 cents, which is all I wanted to provide in this video, so I'll just wrap it up by saying what I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.